The tremor began not in my hands, but deep in my chest, a seismic shift that cracked the very foundations of my carefully constructed world. It wasn't the sterile white of a hospital room nor the hushed whispers of concerned friends that announced the apocalypse. It was the sight of Liam kneeling on the rain-slicked cobblestones, his face a mask of desperate, raw anguish, cradling a shattered shard of glass that had once been my reflection in the cafe window. He wasn't looking at the remnants of my image. He was staring at the crimson stain blooming on his palm, a wound inflicted by the very act of trying to gather the pieces of what was lost. "He stole my heart," I choked out, the words a ragged whisper against the sudden, suffocating silence that had fallen over the street. Not in the romantic, metaphorical way, but literally. Liam, the man who had woven himself into the very fabric of my being, the architect of my laughter and the solace in my tears, had in a moment of frantic, inexplicable rage ripped a piece of my soul out, leaving a gaping, bloody void. I watched, paralyzed, as he pressed the glass shard deeper, a self-inflicted penance that made no sense, a brutal declaration of a love twisted beyond recognition. He mumbled something, a prayer or a curse, his voice lost in the drumming rain, and then with a horrifyingly deliberate motion he raised the shard to his throat. Not to end his own life, not in that instant, but to carve a single elegant line, a crimson echo of the scar that had suddenly appeared on my left wrist, a scar I had no memory of receiving. It was a mirror, a grotesque, horrifying reflection of the pain he'd caused and the pain he now felt. The cafe owner, a stout, bewildered woman, screamed, the sound slicing through the rain-soaked air, but it was too late. Liam had already pressed the glass, not deeply, but enough to mark himself, to claim ownership of the damage he'd wrought. Then he looked up at me, his eyes a swirling vortex of guilt, love, and a terrifying, possessive madness. "You'll never leave," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "because I've taken something you can't live without." He wasn't talking about the metaphorical heart, the one everyone speaks of. He was talking about the scar and the strange, phantom pain that resonated from it, a pain that grew stronger when he was near. He'd somehow impossibly taken a piece of my physical heart and made it his own. The glass shard, I realized, was not just a tool of self-inflicted pain, but a conduit, a bizarre, arcane connection between us. He had stolen my heart, and it was now irrevocably a part of him. The ambulance sirens wailed, a discordant symphony against the backdrop of the relentless rain, pulling me from the frozen tableau of horror. Liam, his eyes still locked on mine, was gently yet firmly guided onto the stretcher, his hand still clutching the bloodied shard. The paramedics, their faces grim, worked with practiced efficiency, their movements a blur of white and red. I watched, a detached observer in my own nightmare, as they stabilized him, the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor a stark reminder of the fragile line between life and death. The cafe owner, her face etched with shock and disbelief, recounted the scene to the police officers, her voice trembling as she described the sudden violent outburst. But her words, though vivid, failed to capture the true essence of the moment, the chilling, almost supernatural connection that had pulsed between Liam and me. It wasn't just a lover's quarrel gone wrong, it was something far more sinister, a dark, twisted ritual of possession. The scar on my wrist throbbed, a dull, persistent ache that mirrored the frantic rhythm of Liam's heart on the monitor. I felt a strange, unsettling pull towards him, a magnetic force that defied logic and reason. It was as if a part of me, a vital, irreplaceable part, was being drawn towards him, trapped within his very being. The police officer, his eyes narrowed in suspicion, asked me questions, his voice sharp and probing, but I could only offer fragmented answers, my mind still reeling from the shock. I couldn't explain the scar nor the strange, agonizing pain that bloomed in my chest when Liam was taken away. I couldn't tell them how the very air around me seemed to thin, how the world seemed to lose its color, its vibrancy, now that he was gone. They wrote my answers down, but their eyes told me that they thought I was in shock, confused, or perhaps even complicit. The twist came when they found a small, intricately carved wooden box in Liam's pocket. Inside, nestled on a bed of crimson velvet, was a tiny, still beating heart, perfectly preserved, yet pulsing with an unnatural, almost ethereal glow. It wasn't a human heart, not entirely. It was smaller, more delicate, with veins that shimmered with an otherworldly luminescence. The police looked at me, then at the heart, and then back at me, their faces a mask of horrified understanding. They understood the literal nature of my stolen heart. They understood the scar. They understood the pull. The box, they said, was sealed with an ancient, unknown symbol, a symbol that resonated with the strange, pulsating energy emanating from the heart within. I knew with a chilling certainty that it was a piece of me, a piece of my very soul, now trapped within that ornate, terrifying container. The hospital room was a sterile white void, a stark contrast to the chaotic, rain-soaked street where my world had shattered. Liam lay unconscious, his face pale and drawn, the heart monitor beeping a steady if unnerving rhythm. The small wooden box, now encased in a clear biohazard-sealed container, sat on the bedside table, its ethereal glow casting an eerie light across the room. The police, their initial skepticism replaced by a palpable unease, had cordoned off the area, treating the room as a crime scene, a site of something inexplicable, something beyond their comprehension. I sat beside Liam, my hand hovering just above his, afraid to touch him, yet desperate for contact. The scar on my wrist throbbed, a constant agonizing reminder of the connection that bound us, a connection that was no longer a symbol of love, but a terrifying, parasitic entanglement. The doctors, their faces etched with confusion and concern, ran tests, their machines whirring and beeping, but they found nothing, no physical anomaly, no explanation for the strange, phantom pain that radiated from my wrist. They looked at me with pity, their eyes filled with a silent understanding of grief, but they didn't understand the truth, the horrifying reality of what had transpired. I felt a strange, almost unbearable weight in my chest, a hollowness that echoed the absence of the stolen piece of my heart. It was as if a vital organ had been removed, leaving a gaping, empty space within me. The twist came when Liam's heart monitor began to fluctuate wildly, the steady beep turning into a frantic, erratic pulse. The doctors rushed in, their voices sharp and urgent, their movements a blur of frantic activity. But it wasn't his heart that was failing, it was mine. The scar on my wrist flared, burning with an intense, agonizing heat, and the pain in my chest intensified, becoming a crushing, suffocating pressure. The small wooden box on the bedside table pulsed with a brighter, more intense glow as if responding to the frantic rhythm of my failing heart. Then the box began to vibrate, a low, ominous hum that filled the room, and the heart within it pulsed in sync with my own erratic heartbeat. Liam's eyes snapped open, his gaze locking onto mine, his face a mask of desperate, agonized love. "Give it back," he whispered, his voice hoarse and weak. "Give me back what's mine." He wasn't asking for the wooden box or the literal heart it contained. He was asking for the feeling, the emotion, the very essence of my love, which he now felt as a burning, toxic thing. He realized the heart, the physical item, was a vessel for the love, and he was now being consumed by it. He was now the one who was trapped. The air in the hospital room crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that pressed down on us, heavy and suffocating. The doctors, their faces pale and bewildered, watched in stunned silence as the small wooden box pulsed and vibrated, its ethereal glow intensifying, casting long, distorted shadows across the sterile white walls. Liam, his eyes fixed on mine, strained against the restraints, his voice a desperate, pleading whisper. "Please," he begged, his words laced with a raw, agonizing pain that mirrored my own. "It's killing us both." He wasn't exaggerating. The scar on my wrist burned like a brand, the pain radiating through my veins, a searing, agonizing fire that threatened to consume me. My chest felt like it was being crushed, the hollowness within me expanding, threatening to swallow me whole. The heart monitor beeped erratically, a frantic, desperate rhythm that echoed the chaotic storm raging within me. I felt a strange, almost irresistible urge to reach for the box, to open it, to reclaim the stolen piece of myself, but a primal fear held me back, a chilling premonition of the consequences. The twist came when the wooden box began to levitate, rising slowly into the air, its ethereal glow illuminating the room with an otherworldly light. The heart within pulsed with a frantic, desperate rhythm, its veins shimmering with an almost blinding luminescence. Liam's eyes widened, his face etched with a mixture of terror and awe. "It's trying to return," he gasped, his voice barely a whisper. "It's trying to come back." The box hovered in the air, suspended between us, a tangible representation of the twisted connection that bound us. The scar on my wrist pulsed, the pain intensifying, and I felt a strange, almost magnetic pull towards the floating box. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with an unseen energy that made my skin tingle. Then the box began to spin, slowly at first, then faster and faster, its ethereal glow creating a swirling vortex of light. The heart within pulsed with a blinding intensity, its veins radiating a heat that made the air shimmer. Suddenly the box stopped spinning, and the heart within emitted a single, piercing pulse of light, a blinding flash that filled the room. The heart then emitted a voice, not a human voice, but a chorus of whispers, my whispers, his whispers, all our whispered memories, now a single, terrifying entity. Return, it echoed, the word resonating through the room, a command, a plea, a threat. The scar on my wrist opened, not a clean cut, but a blooming, ragged tear, and the light from the heart, now a tangible beam, began to pull towards it, a desperate, agonizing reunion. The beam of light, a searing, incandescent thread, snaked its way across the sterile white of the hospital room, pulling the pulsating heart towards the gaping wound on my wrist. The doctors, their faces a mask of stunned disbelief, recoiled in horror, their scientific minds unable to comprehend the impossible spectacle unfolding before them. Liam, his eyes filled with a desperate, pleading love, reached out to me, his hand trembling, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Stop it," he begged. "Please, you have to stop it." He wasn't pleading for his own sake, but for mine. He understood the consequence of the reunion, the terrifying symbiosis that would bind us forever. The scar on my wrist pulsed, the wound widening, the pain intensifying, a searing, agonizing fire that threatened to consume me. The heart, now a blinding orb of light, hovered just inches from the wound, its ethereal glow casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable tension that made my skin crawl. I felt a strange, almost irresistible urge to surrender, to let the heart return, to complete the twisted ritual that had begun on the rain-soaked cobblestones. The twist came when, at the last moment, as the heart was about to merge with my flesh, I remembered. I remembered the feeling of the heart being taken, the agonizing rip, the feeling of something vital being torn away. I remembered the love, twisted and possessive, that had driven Liam to such desperate measures. I remembered the fear, the chilling, primal terror of being bound to another, of losing my autonomy, my very self. And I remembered the scar not as a wound, but as a gateway. I didn't push the heart back, I did something far more unexpected. I turned and pressed my bleeding wrist against Liam's chest, the wound aligning perfectly with the frantic beat of his own heart. The light from the heart, now a desperate, pleading entity, flowed into him, the connection reversing, the stolen peace returning to its thief. Liam screamed, a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated agony, his body convulsing as the heart merged with his own. The heart monitor flatlined, the steady beep replaced by a deafening silence. The wooden box shattered, its ornate carvings splintering into dust. The scar on my wrist closed, leaving behind only a faint silver line. The pain vanished, replaced by a chilling emptiness, a profound sense of loss. He stole my heart, and I gave it back, not to reclaim it, but to destroy him, to sever the twisted bond that had threatened to consume us both. The love he had stolen, now returned, became his undoing. He wanted my heart, and he got it, and it killed him, proving that some things, once taken, can never be returned without devastating consequences.